It's a pleasure to be here and to see other people with a bizarre obsession that I have too. So my talk for the title is From Fantasy to Reality, Conlanging as Psychosocial Activism. So let me ask you something. What kind of world would you like you and your grandchildren, your children and grandchildren to live in? Not the kind of question you were expecting to launch a language construction conference, eh? It is a type of fantasy, though, a fantasy of the future. Do you think your kids would like to live, as Buckminster Fuller suggested, in a world that works for everybody? The correct answer is yes, of course, unless you're Donald Trump. Constructing languages is a way of making worlds. I borrow that phrase from the philosopher Nelson Goodman, who wrote a book called Ways of World Making. He says, "We have words without a world, but no world without words or other symbols. World making, as we know it, always starts from worlds already on hand. The making is a remaking." In 1989, I knew what kind of world I wanted to make, and I was trying to find words for it. As a grad student at the University of Chicago, I wanted to study topics like paradox, mutual interdependence, non-duality, and I wanted to invent new ways to express them in English. Where others saw an either-or world, I saw both and. I dreamt that I would find a way for language to do more. And when I tried to explain all my ideas to my department chair, lay out the plans for my thesis work, he looked at me flatly and said, "Well, I don't see what your problem with language is. It works just fine for me." My future as Sisyphus flashed before my eyes. I would roll a rock up the hill. "Get it? Do you get it now, Professor?" And he would kick it back down again and again and again. So I left. I still believe that language can do more. Language content is always being added so that we can say more. And with constructed languages, we can say things in ways that are not possible in natural languages. The fact that you're here means that you're interested in creating something different. You are questioning, looking for new ways to express yourself, perhaps even to communicate with others. Marshall McLuhan, the prophet from Edmonton, wrote the following 50 years ago, and it is still relevant today.
"Our time is a time for crossing barriers, for erasing old categories, for probing around. When two seemingly disparate elements are imaginatively posed, put in apposition in new and unique ways, startling discoveries often result."
Before that grad school crash and burn, I studied questions. Questions are funny things, epistemologically at least. You have to know enough about what you don't know, what you desire to know, in order to formulate a question. So you can't formulate a question about something you truly don't know you don't know. But that is where the juice is, where creativity drags you along for the ride. There are things you know about language, but you learned them before you developed the ability to question them. So they got submerged into a kind of unconscious knowledge. What you don't know, you know. Back in Chicago, I wanted to know how to build paradox into the core of a concept. Not just create merged concepts like bittersweet, but more like X becoming not X, where X and not X are one but also different. Think oak or acorn and oak. How could concepts contain the essence of paradoxical structures like Mobius strips and Klein bottles? The way Heidegger's concept of being integrated concepts of subject and object in the philosophical sense, not the syntactic sense. 10 years ago, still in pursuit of that, I wrote a novel in which I developed what I considered new types of words. It wasn't a fully developed conlang or ficlang, and now looking back, I can see that I only came up with some trees without seeing the forest, let alone the whole ecosystem. To see the ecosystem, I had to learn to ask some questions that helped me become aware of what I didn't know. I'll share them with you. These are questions you can take with you to the other presentations. You can take home with you. Perhaps they might even keep you up at night. Maybe you will find them useful as you make worlds and construct languages. Maybe they will help reveal your language's ecosystem. Number 1, why am I doing this? Indeed, that is the question. There is no wrong answer. It is just good, as Plato said, to know thyself. Number 2, what assumptions do I have about reality? And I put reality in scare quotes because it really is getting kind of scary out there. Specifically, what assumptions do I have about the reality I am creating by means of this language? Let me repeat. What assumptions do I have about the reality I am creating by means of this language? You might think, but I'm not creating reality, I'm creating a fantasy world. Hold that thought. We'll come back to it. Number 3, what assumptions do I have about language, about how it works, about what is required versus what is superfluous, about its purpose? Other people later in the conference will deal with those, get into more details about those kinds of questions. Number 4, what are the assumptions underlying the subsystems in my conlang? And how do I envision the relation among these? I am referring to those facets of language that are necessary and that together make it work. The sign vehicles, the concepts and category structures, syntax, semantics, logic, metaphors, both explicit and implicit, and of course, the oral and graphic representational systems. Each one of those subsystems is a place to tweak your assumptions. Number 5, what are the suprasystems, the cultures and subcultures in which my conlang exists? The suprasystem or culture defines the category structure. The broader you go, namely toward larger and more entrenched systems, the more difficult it is to change the assumptions. Cultural change is often fiercely resisted. Imagine trying to change the more is better assumption of Wall Street and Walmart. Each subsystem can be questioned separately, but they all function together. 2020 hindsight has shown me that my big mistake was that I questioned language only at the levels of concept and sign vehicle. I completely missed the interconnected subsystems. I didn't realize that what I wanted to do would require, for example, a radically different form of logic, logic to handle both and. In my attempt at a conlang, the law of non-contradiction itself needed to be questioned. But that was in my blind spot. What I didn't know, I didn't know. Another example, if your world is based on a holographic paradigm, say, where every part contains the whole, then perhaps even the law of identity needs to be questioned. Number 6, what is your category structure? How do you divvy up the world? We learn category structure by what can be predicated to what. In your language world, do trees have emotions? Are the mountains sentient? Or do they merely float, like on Pandora? Number 7, what is fundamental? Discrete objects, discrete processes, non-discrete fields, or something entirely different? Indeed, do boundaries exist? What is their nature? If there is one take-home point to my talk, it is this. question all your assumptions. But why? Why would I suggest such a radical thing? This brings me to the subtitle of my talk, Conlanging as Psychosocial Activism. The social activism part is self-evident, right? Language is at the core of our social institutions, government, education, commerce, even marriage. If those institutions are not working, let's look to language. Let's invent something new. We circle back to world making. What kinds of social worlds are you making? Do you want to make? If, and I emphasize if, Benjamin Morf is right that, quote, the structure of a human being's language influences the manner in which he or she understands reality and behaves with respect to it, then the structure of the languages you create can have powerful effects. So, for example, in Avatar, the culture of Pandora among the indigenous people, anyway, is highly interconnected and spiritual. I look forward, now I can say it directly to you, I look forward, Mr. Frommer, to see what you do in the sequels.
Looking forward as well.
Now, what do I mean by the psycho part of psychosocial activism? Imagine protesting yourself, marching against your most cherished beliefs to open your mind to something else. I think conlanging is a path to doing that. Earlier, I asked you to consider a lot of questions that might help you examine your assumptions, and I asked them in the first person. Why am I doing this? What assumptions do I have, etc.? But under those questions is the big unanswerable question. Who am I? Aside from the psychological aspects of that question, lie down on the couch, please, that will be $175. What that simple one-letter word conveys is anything but simple. The great trickster, Alan Watts, noted that few people seem to use the word I for their whole physical organism. I have a body is more common than I am a body. We speak of my legs as we speak of my clothes. And I seems to remain intact even if the legs are amputated and the clothes are taken off. And what about all those not I's out there? All those objects in space before I as a perceiving subject. Our collective assumption via the containment metaphor that there are actual objects in actual space before an actual perceiving subject is directly related to syntax. What does it mean to be an object, a subject? What does it mean for them to be contained in space? Could there be other ways of conceiving of reality as events, as intersections of waveforms, as strings getting tangled into knots, as fields playing a kind of musical field dynamics? Watts would ask whether there are even any not I's out there. He says, the fact is that because no one thing or feature of this universe is separable from the whole, the only real you is the whole. So how do we speak, not just about that, but from that perspective of individual within wholeness? The futurist Fred Pollack studied past society, what past societies thought about the future, and wondered whether their ideas came to pass. Spoiler alert, they did. As to our future, he asked, what are the implications of a disintegrating image of the future of Western culture for the future of this culture? We have just to look to Hollywood for disintegrating images of the future of Western culture. I come back to my original question. What future do you want to live into? We humans, through our language, get to lay the foundations for the future, our future, our children's future. English, as you know, is shot through with war metaphors. Politics, sports, healthcare, even the weather rely on war metaphors. Do you think we will create a peaceful world for our children if we continually talk about our most cherished and important topics in terms of war? Will we solve the big issues like climate change, inequality, or prejudice if we continue using language structures that presuppose separateness rather than our connectedness? So as we here create languages for whatever purpose, film, books, as art, or simply for the hell of it, consider what your language could do to make a future you want to live into. And consider that since language requires more than one participant, what new media might be required. Our dear friend.
All media work us over completely. They are so pervasive in their
personal,
political,
economic, aesthetic,
psychological, moral,
ethical,
and social consequences that they leave no part of us untouched, unaffected, unaltered.
In the 30 plus years I have been thinking about these things, it has only been in the last few that I've become aware of how many other people are interested too. Why is this happening now? 25 years ago, I was shamed out of the academy for trying to find a way for language to presuppose wholeness and for proposing to create new language. Now we are here doing just that. What is happening globally, culturally, within our consciousness that so many people want to create language? I don't know, but I love it. Might it be part of an evolutionary leap in consciousness? If so, how might the creation of Conlangs inform Natlangs, and hence our culture, our world, life as we live it? I want to respond to that question on this note with notes made famous by another wise Canadian, another great Canadian whose wisdom should be the final word.
and speak to your beauty with a burning violin. Lift me like an olive branch.
I'm just going to let it play till the end. I want you to hear the end of it. It's not the whole song.
End of love, dancing to the end of love. Let me see your beauty when the witnesses are gone. Let me see you moving like they do in Babylon. Show me slowly what I want and only love so. That's the end of love.
Okay, time for a few questions.
So I'm paradoxed in your language. I'm wondering if you ever looked at or played with Primus' semantic squares, exposing these paradoxes, hitting words that we might naturally think opposites related.
Could you email me a link to something?
I will do that.
Yeah.
My name
right.